Forget what you were taught in school. Civilization didn't just happen. It arrived, shimmering, loud, and impossibly bright, from the sky. You wake up beneath a horizon that isn't quite empty. The desert stretches around you, endless and silent, but something above feels occupied. The stars seem to hum, the air tastes like copper, and somewhere in your bones you know, someone's watching. Not a metaphor. Not a god in your imagination. Someone real. Welcome to the beginning, or, depending on how you look at it, the visitation. They'll call them many names later. Anunnaki in Sumer, Watchers in Judea, Shining Ones in Egypt, Devis in India. But for now, they're just the beings who came down when humanity was still barely out of the mud, still arguing over who got to keep the fire. And they came with gifts. The kind that make you wonder whether it was generosity or a long-term experiment. You see, when the first Sumerian farmers etched their neat little lines of barley fields into the river plains of Mesopotamia, something strange happened. Writing appeared. Astronomy appeared. Rules, math, law, the full starter pack of civilization, all at once. It's almost suspiciously convenient. But every origin story needs a spark. So the Sumerians told theirs like this. The Anunnaki, offspring of the sky god En and the earth goddess Ki, descended to bring order. They shaped kingship, they taught irrigation, and, if you read between the clay tablets, they may have also demanded something in return. Worship. Obedience. A few genetic modifications, depending on which story you believe. You can almost imagine it. A group of wide-eyed humans staring up as the gods descend, glowing, enormous, clothed in light or metal, speaking in thunder. The people drop their stone tools. The beings show them how to count the stars. Civilization begins. And somewhere in the fine print, humanity becomes the apprentice species. Of course, archaeologists will tell you it's just myth, that people invented these stories to explain the unexplainable. But maybe, just maybe, the stories remember something real. After all, almost every ancient culture swears someone came from above. In Babylon, they called them the Ijiji, the ones who served the greater gods, the intermediaries who toiled on earth. In the Book of Enoch, they're the Watchers, angels who descended, taught forbidden knowledge, and, in an unfortunate turn, fell in love with human women. In Mesoamerica, they're the feathered serpents, who came from the stars to teach calendars, agriculture, and architecture. Different names. Same direction, down. So maybe the sky isn't empty. Maybe it's just quiet now. You can almost hear the whispers of those who once came down, standing over mud brick cities that now crumble in silence. They left behind temples shaped like launch pads, ziggurats aligned perfectly with constellations, and stories of beings who walked with the gods. Not bad for a species that supposedly invented everything alone. And here's the strange part. The Sumerians never claimed to have invented their knowledge. They said it was given to them by beings who looked like men but weren't. They even drew them that way, broad shoulders, strange helmets, wings or something like them, holding what looked suspiciously like tools or devices. Coincidence? Possibly. But coincidences make good bedtime stories. You glance up at the same stars those ancient people saw. Same constellations. Same patterns. And yet, something about the silence feels staged, like whoever used to be watching just stepped out of the room. Congratulations. You've arrived at humanity's oldest rumor. That we didn't rise alone. We were lifted. And the ones who lifted us? They might still be watching. You wake up before dawn again. The sky hasn't changed, still an enormous, cold sheet of ink, but the world beneath it has. Yesterday you were just a clever animal. Today you're civilized. Congratulations. Someone decided you deserved an upgrade. You don't remember asking for it. No one does. But the gifts came anyway. Seeds, stars, numbers, laws. All wrapped in mystery and a faint aftertaste of control. The stories say the Anunnaki descended and began their little classroom experiment. You, the attentive student. Them, the cosmic professors. Their lesson plan was ambitious. How to dig channels through the Tigris and Euphrates without dying of thirst, how to make mud bricks stack into something like permanence, how to track the heavens so you could plant at the right time, and, crucially, how to count your grain so no one accidentally stole it. They didn't just give tools. They gave structure. And structure is a polite word for rules. The tablets tell you about Enki, the clever one, the bringer of knowledge; in Lil, the stern administrator who preferred obedience; and in Nana, who could charm or destroy depending on the mood of the wind. If they sound human, that's part of the point. They wanted to be worshipped, not just admired. And so, you learned. You plowed, you wrote, you built. In exchange, you offered grain, blood, and prayer. A fair trade, if you didn't think too hard about who really benefited. Writing, that was the biggest surprise. Before, you told stories by firelight. Now, you pressed wedges into clay. At first it was just numbers, inventory lists, receipts for barley or goats. But the symbols began to sing. They carried memory. They carried myth. And soon, your children would write about the very beings who taught you how to write in the first place. That's when history and legend started to blur, probably forever. Because the gods weren't content with being worshipped. They wanted to be remembered. So they had you carve their names into stone, their stories into tablets, their order into law. In one version, they even created humans for the purpose of labor, little biological assistants to ease the workload of the divine. You dig the canals, you harvest the crops, you pray 3 times a day. In return, they promise protection, or at least the illusion of it. It's a clever system. Give knowledge just advanced enough to make people productive, but not so much that they start asking awkward questions about why the sky looks like a machine. And it worked. Civilizations blossomed, temples multiplied, kings claimed divine ancestry, and priests acted as middle management between heaven and earth. You can almost hear the whisper behind it all. Remember who taught you this. Now, let's talk about the other side of the gift, the paranoia. Because once you start believing your teachers came from the stars, every lightning bolt looks like surveillance, and every comet feels like a memo from corporate. The priests said the gods could see everything, every dishonest measure, every stolen loaf, every whispered rebellion. They didn't invent morality, they just weaponized it. Still, there's beauty in it. You look up at the constellations the Anunnaki supposedly charted, Orion, Taurus, the Pleiades, and you feel a strange kinship with the people who first drew them. They were trying to read a cosmic instruction manual, written in lights too far away to touch. And maybe they weren't wrong. Maybe the sky really was a book, one written by visitors who expected you to follow the rules even after they were gone. So here you are, literate, organized, anxious, and ever so slightly paranoid. The perfect modern human template, forged thousands of years before the word modern existed. No toilet, no soap, no sense of privacy. But at least you have writing. Spoiler alert, it only gets worse. Because once you have knowledge, you start wanting more, and the beings who gave it to you aren't keen on sharing everything. Some doors, they said, were meant to stay closed. And you, of course, are about to knock anyway. You've done well. You can plant, count, build, and bleed on schedule. The gods, or whatever they were, should be proud. But pride was never their strong suit. They warned you not to reach too high, remember? Don't ask where they came from. Don't copy their tools. Don't look directly at the machinery behind the stars. Naturally, you did all 3. It started small. A few clay tablets scratched with questions no one was supposed to ask. Why do the gods eat what we eat? Why do they need offerings if they're immortal? Why does the thunder sound like metal grinding? Then came the tinkering. Bronze instead of stone. Simple gears that mimicked the heavens. A fire hotter than it should be. Nothing dramatic, just curiosity in its larval stage. According to the old tales, that's when the trouble began. The Watchers, the angels of old texts, looked down and saw humanity trying to imitate the divine syllabus. Some pitied you. Some envied you. And a few, always a few, fell in love with you. The Book of Enoch tells it like a scandal. 200 Watchers descended on Mount Hermon, taught metalwork, cosmetics, enchantments, astronomy, and the cutting of roots. Basically, the entire human resume. They weren't supposed to. Heavenly management was furious. Knowledge was fine in controlled doses, not in the wild. So the forbidden curriculum expanded. You learned how to forge a sword, read the stars for war, whisper to the dead. You learned vanity, too, something about coal around the eyes and feeling briefly godlike in the reflection of a dark river. And then you learned consequence. The stories say the sky cracked open with anger. A flood came, a cleanup operation disguised as natural disaster. The Watchers were chained, their children destroyed, humanity reset. Corporate restructuring, celestial addition. You're left standing on the shore of a world that's been rinsed. Everything smells of mud and guilt. You still have the knowledge, though. That part sticks. The plow still cuts the earth the same way. The stars still move according to their secret geometry. But now there's a whisper inside every human thought. Be careful what you learn. And you try, honestly you do, to obey. But curiosity is a parasite that doesn't die easily. You start to hide your experiments, call them rituals. You build temples, not laboratories. You mix prayer with observations so no one notices the science underneath. The gods watch, or maybe they don't. Either way, silence feels safer than another flood. Still, in the dark corners of ziggurats and mountain caves, a few people keep learning. They trace constellations, grind strange powders, and sketch beings with wings that look suspiciously mechanical. The priests call it heresy. You call it Tuesday night. And somewhere between fear and fascination, the human species becomes addicted. Knowledge is no longer a gift, it's a hunger. The kind that burns hotter the more you feed it. Every age after this will replay the same argument in different costumes. The gods say no, the humans say please, and someone eventually steals the fire. You'll call it alchemy, enlightenment, or artificial intelligence, depending on the century. But the script never really changes. Tonight, as you sit beside a dying fire, you can feel that pattern beginning. You glance at the stars, those same indifferent lights, and you wonder what else they're hiding. You already know the answer, everything. And you'll try to take it, one forbidden lesson at a time. The morning arrives smelling of rain, but this isn't the friendly kind that waters barley. This rain has weight, intent, and a deadline. You wake to the sound of distant thunder that doesn't quite sound like thunder. It's lower, mechanical, as if the sky itself is grinding its teeth. People around you whisper that the gods are angry again. Of course they are. They always are. You should have known the lessons came with strings attached. Knowledge is fine when it stays in the temples, safely locked behind the priest's smiles. But now everyone wants to play God. Someone built a tower that scraped the clouds. Someone forged a blade meant for more than farming. Someone said out loud that maybe the gods aren't gods at all. And that was enough. The tablets call it a cleansing. Later generations will downgrade it to myth. But right now, standing ankle-deep in rising water, it feels pretty real. You run for higher ground. The animals do too. Pairs, trios, anything that breathes and panics. The sky breaks open, and suddenly it's not sky anymore. It's a ceiling of water collapsing onto everything you ever built. Mud walls crumble like wet bread. Temples dissolve into slurry. Your neighbors are gone in minutes. The flood keeps coming. Days blur into nights, nights into gray mornings. All you can do is float, cling, remember. Somewhere, someone has a boat big enough to matter. His story will be told under different names. Kaisera, Adnapishtim, Noah. He'll become the lucky footnote, the one who found favor. You, meanwhile, keep paddling through the debris of a civilization that got too curious. It's almost funny, if you like your humor drowning. The gods destroy humanity for learning too much. But somehow, they let the libraries survive, just enough to start the whole problem again. Floods cleanse the land, not the memory. When the rain finally stops, the silence hurts your ears. Steam rises from the earth like breath. Everything smells of rot and renewal. You step onto ground that feels unfamiliar, like the world has been rebooted and the settings are stricter now. No more watchers. No more open instruction manuals in the stars. The gods have withdrawn behind their storm clouds, pretending they never needed you. You rebuild, of course. Humans are annoyingly persistent that way. You dig the same canals, plant the same fields, invent the same writing system all over again. And every time you draw a line in the clay, you can't help wondering if you're just rewriting the mistakes that drowned you. Centuries will pass before anyone dares to say the word Anunnaki aloud again. By then, their temples will be buried under new ones, their stories disguised as parables, their technology as miracles. The flood will shrink into a bedtime story told to children. Behave, or the sky will remember how to open. But you'll remember the other version, the one whispered by survivors who claimed to see lights moving above the clouds, long after the rain stopped. Maybe the gods didn't leave. Maybe they just cleaned the experiment and started over. You lie awake that night, staring at a sky that looks newly washed. The stars twinkle innocently, as if they weren't complicit. And you realize something both comforting and terrible. The flood didn't end the story, it reset it. You'll rebuild the cities. You'll rediscover the numbers. You'll find new names for the same old gods. And one day, someone else will look up, curious, and the whole cycle will begin again. For now, though, the air is calm, the ground is wet, and you're alive. Congratulations. You passed the test, barely. Just don't expect extra credit. The water retreats the way guilt does, slowly, leaving behind a mess no one wants to claim. You stand on a shore made of everything you used to know. Shattered pottery. Burnt wood. A civilization's junk drawer turned inside out. You should feel lucky. You're still breathing. Instead, you feel like someone pressed reset on existence and forgot to give you the new instructions. The first few months are simple: survive. Find dry ground, food that hasn't drowned, people who aren't ghosts. The silence is heavy, and it smells of mud and ozone. Some nights, you think you hear the sea whispering the names of the gods it took back. Other nights, you think it's laughter. When the ground finally stops bleeding water, you start to rebuild. Not because you're hopeful, but because humans are allergic to emptiness. You pile stones where temples used to be. You stack clay where ziggurats once touched the clouds. Every wall you raise feels like a dare. Another invitation for the sky to test your persistence. The elders say the gods are gone. Others say they're sleeping. A few insist they still walk among you, hiding in plain sight as kings and heroes. You can't tell which version is comforting and which is terrifying. Maybe they're the same thing. So you give the sky a new name, just in case. You call it Anu again, or El, or Ra, or Zeus, whatever your new dialect decides sounds respectable. You tell stories about how the gods once lived here, on mountains or in towers, before returning home. You pretend that they left willingly, not because they lost patience. And then something strange happens. The myths start to evolve. The Anunnaki become less like engineers and more like kings. The Watchers turn into moral lessons, celestial HR warnings about overstepping boundaries. Flood survivors turn their trauma into scripture. It's amazing what a little editing can do. You begin to build not just walls but hierarchies. Someone claims to be descended from the old gods. Someone else nods and starts collecting taxes. Priests reappear, this time with better costumes. They translate divine silence into laws, rituals, and convenient prohibitions. It's comforting to think the gods still care enough to make rules, even if those rules mainly involve obedience. You notice that king and god start sounding suspiciously alike. That's no accident. People need someone to kneel to, and the old celestial supervisors aren't returning the messages. So you invent middle management, human rulers with inherited holiness. They sit on thrones shaped like lightning bolts, wear crowns that glint like starlight, and assure everyone they're in touch with the upstairs department. The flood becomes a story you tell to keep children from asking dangerous questions. Don't build towers. Don't question heaven. And for the love of all that's sacred, don't invent metallurgy again. But curiosity, that old parasite, never really drowned. You catch yourself gazing at the stars the way a moth stares at a flame, half fearful, half hypnotized. You start marking their positions again, just for fun. A few generations later, it's called astronomy. A few more, and it's religion again. Everything old becomes sacred, then forbidden, then rediscovered. It's a cycle so predictable even the gods might roll their eyes. As centuries pass, memory becomes myth, and myth becomes architecture. Every city you rebuild has the bones of the old one buried underneath, a layered fossil of ambition. The new temples rise higher, more precise. You carve symbols of winged beings into the stone, not because you remember them clearly, but because the silhouette feels right. You light fires, sing hymns, and pretend you understand the words. Somewhere in those flames, you imagine a reflection of the sky that once taught you everything. You tell yourself the gods will come back when they're ready. You tell yourself they were teachers, not wardens. You tell yourself a lot of things. Mostly you tell yourself stories. And in those stories, you hide a simple truth. You never stopped waiting for the sky to open again. Time passes differently now. The flood is memory, softened by distance and denial. The world is repopulating itself, quietly, as if embarrassed by the whole incident. You'd think humanity would be cautious after a divine near-extinction event. But no, curiosity has a longer lifespan than fear. You begin to hear rumors from faraway lands. Different languages, same stories. They talk about gods who descended from the sky, taught, ruled, and left. You don't remember sending them your mythology, yet somehow it's everywhere. It's as if the same visitors made a world tour before the invention of boats. In the Nile Valley they call them the Netcher, shining ones who arrived from the stars of Orion and Sirius, bringing order to chaos. One of them, a tall figure named Osiris, teaches agriculture and justice. His wife, Isis, learns to raise the dead. His brother, Set, handles the anger management issues. It's the same pattern in different costumes. Further west, beyond deserts and oceans you'll never see, stories blossom about winged serpents who teach calendars and crop rotation. In Mesoamerica, the locals name one Quetzalcoatl. He descends, civilizes, sends. He promises to return. The details blur, but the direction never changes. Down from the heavens, up again when things get messy. In India, the Devas and Asuras fight eternal sky wars. In Greece, the Titans fall to the Olympians who descend to rule mortals. In the far north, the Aesir and Vanir build bridges between realms. Everyone, everywhere, seems convinced that the world once hosted guests from above. It's tempting to think the stories are trade goods, carried by merchants and sailors, reshaped in translation. But the similarities are too neat. The motifs, bright teachers, forbidden unions, catastrophic floods, fit together like fragments of the same tablet. You sit by a fire, listening to travelers recount these tales, and a thought you shouldn't think slips in. Maybe the flood didn't wipe the slate clean. Maybe it just redistributed the evidence. There's a cynical comfort in that. If everyone remembers the same impossible thing, maybe it wasn't impossible. Maybe the sky didn't visit one valley, it visited all of them. You picture it, great craft shimmering above new lands, strangers stepping out with the same serene impatience, handing out mathematics like party favors. Every culture receives its starter kit: language, law, geometry, guilt. They build temples in gratitude, then myths in confusion. The visitors leave before the thank you notes dry. Centuries later, you can still see their fingerprints. Pyramids pointing at constellations, legends that align with equinoxes, carvings that look suspiciously like helmets and breathing masks. Archaeologists will call them stylized artistic choices. You will call them memories pretending to be art. And maybe that's the saddest part. The further these stories travel, the less they sound like history. The gods become metaphors. The machines become monsters. The teachers become myths. But myths are stubborn things. They survive droughts, empires, and skeptics with fancy degrees. They cling to language like seeds on a traveler's coat, waiting for another mind to believe them again. You stare up at the night sky. Same stars, new names. You wonder if those scattered lights remember where they've been. If they keep a record of all the civilizations that once looked up and swore they saw movement. The wind sighs through the reeds, carrying whispers of 1,000 versions of the same story. Different continents, same lesson. Someone came, someone taught, someone left, and humanity has been trying to call them back ever since. You begin to notice a pattern. The further humanity spreads, the more someone insists they're special. Not because of talent, luck, or charm, but because they're different, divine even, descended from the ones who came down from the sky. The myths call them many names. In Sumer, kings claimed Anunnaki ancestry. In Babylon, rulers traced their lineage to Ijiji. In Egypt, pharaohs insisted their blood was touched by the Netcher. Mesoamerican emperors swore loyalty to Quetzalcoatl, insisting the wind carried his essence into their veins. You can see the trend. If someone needs authority, the fastest route is celestial. It's efficient and frighteningly effective. A human king with divine blood is difficult to argue with, especially when everyone already knows the gods can flood the world without warning. You kneel, you pay tribute, you stop asking questions. But let's be honest. This is less about worship and more about control. The sky beings may have left, but the rumor of their return is enough. If people think your veins carry the essence of a teacher god, obedience comes naturally. You get taxes, armies, rituals, and gossip all in one package. Somewhere along the line, the stories get spicy. The Watchers, remember, didn't just teach, they intermarried. Heavenly DNA meets human DNA, and suddenly you have hybrid children running around. Giants, demigods, heroes. The line between divine and mortal blurs so thoroughly that every epic is basically a family tree with nuclear weapons. It's a miracle anyone can figure out inheritance at all. Kings begin to decorate themselves accordingly. Crowns, scepters, gold jewelry that looks like sunlight bottled into shape. Temples sprout on strategic hills. Artisans carve reliefs of winged figures with mysterious tools. All symbols of ancestry, all subtle reminders. Remember who your real boss is. And somewhere behind the veneer of ritual, the real lesson sinks in. Civilization isn't built on knowledge alone. It's built on belief in authority, in myth, in bloodlines that may or may not have touched the sky. That's how empires endure when gods disappear. You don't need divine oversight if everyone already thinks you have it. The narrative shifts again in far-off lands. In India, the Devis grant kings dharma through their bloodline. In Greece, heroes like Heracles straddle the line between man and god. In the Americas, rulers claim descent from celestial serpents. Different continents, different cultures, same solution. If you want obedience, sell ancestry, not morals. And yet, something about it rings hollow. You can see the fear underneath the flattery. Every coronation, every temple dedication, every sacrifice is a subtle acknowledgement. We remember the ones who descended, and were terrified they might come back. Perhaps that's the genius of the sky beings. Even absent, even silent, they keep humanity organized. A memory so potent it survives centuries, rewritten into stories, laws, and symbols. You can obey without being watched as long as you remember who once did watch. You trace the pattern in your own mind. Bloodlines, myths, pyramids, kings. It's almost elegant in its cruelty. The gods leave. Humanity builds. The humans claim divine heritage. The cycle repeats. Obedience masquerades as divinity. Reverence becomes politics. And yet, despite all the rules, all the authority, the fear, the rituals, there's a spark of rebellion in every generation. A quiet thought. What if the sky beings weren't gods at all? Or what if I can learn the lessons they left behind without kneeling? That spark is dangerous. History shows it burns cities, reshapes empires, floods valleys. But the spark is irresistible. Because anyone who has looked at the stars, as your ancestors did, knows the pull of something beyond the earth beneath their feet. For now, though, kings sit on thrones, priests chant, and the rest of humanity keeps the myth alive. Blood remembers. Stories remember. And somewhere, in the quiet of a desert night or a mountain valley, the sky remembers too. You've survived floods, kings, and millennia of obedience. You've learned that the sky can give, and it can punish. And somewhere between survival and civilization, you stumble across something dangerous. Knowledge humans weren't meant to have. The stories call it many things. The Sumerians inscribed it on clay tablets. The Hebrews whispered it in the Book of Enoch. Across the world, it's called hidden wisdom, esoteric teaching, forbidden lore. It's not a law or a craft. It's the part of the universe you weren't supposed to touch. And yet somehow you do anyway. Imagine the Watchers standing over you again. They taught you agriculture, writing, astronomy, the counting of time. But there were lessons they kept for themselves. Secrets coded into the stars, rituals that manipulate fate, the kind of information that could raise the dead or destroy the living. They warned you not to learn these things. Naturally, curiosity is what defines humans, so you did. You start small. A hidden chamber under a ziggurat, a scroll that describes the stars differently than the priest said. A device made of bronze and string that mimics celestial movement. A whispered chant that promises visions. Each piece is a key, each observation a temptation. And with every key comes danger. The old myths promise retribution. Floods, plagues, famine, war. Sometimes the punishments feel literal. Sometimes they're metaphorical, shaping society so subtly you don't notice the chains. Either way, the result is the same. Knowledge is power, and power is terrifying. The Watchers' greatest gift, it seems, was also a curse. The information they gave you is seductive, but incomplete. You see patterns in the heavens, the rivers, the cycles of life, but only fragments. Half knowledge is dangerous. It drives humans to obsession, to empire, to ambition that ignores morality. And every civilization you rebuild dances on that edge. Temples become laboratories. Priests become scientists. Kings become engineers of belief. You carve symbols into stone that encode mathematics and astrology disguised as worship. You write rituals that encode chemistry and metallurgy. All the while, the sky watches silently, or perhaps it doesn't. The Watchers might be gone, but their legacy lingers like a ghost in every discovery, every invention, every step toward godhood. Some humans misinterpret the knowledge. They call it magic, alchemy, divine favor, or curse. They try to replicate the gifts of the Watchers, often with catastrophic results. Fire they can't control, metal that cuts too deep, calculations that predict catastrophe but cannot prevent it. The stories always mention that temptation and failure are part of the lesson. Knowledge without wisdom is a weapon pointed at your own head. And yet, despite the danger, it persists. You pass down secrets in whispers, in hidden codices, in ritual and myth. Each generation preserves fragments, sometimes deliberately, sometimes by accident. A scribe notes a pattern in the stars. A priest records a formula for irrigation. A shaman sketches a vision on bark. They don't understand why they're preserving it. They only know it feels important, like a memory from before humanity's awakening. The irony is cruel. The very lessons that nearly destroyed humans, the forbidden, dangerous knowledge, are the same ones that build civilization. Without them, kings would be nothing but farmers, cities nothing but villages, temples nothing but piles of mud. But with them, ambition runs wild, empires rise and fall, and the world teeters on the edge of cosmic consequence. And so it continues. You keep learning. You keep hiding. You keep teaching, carefully, selectively, with coded words that seem like ritual, but are really survival instructions. The Watchers may have vanished, but their influence is woven into every stone, every star chart, every story. You glance at the night sky, remembering what the ancients feared to say aloud. Someone powerful, someone above, once chose you to be a student. And even after all the floods, all the empires, all the centuries, the lessons remain. Dangerous, beautiful, irresistible, and you can't help but reach for them. You'd think, after floods, punishments, and genetic experiments gone wrong, humans would stop worshipping their cosmic teachers. But no, we double down. We build temples. We invent priesthoods. We carve gods into stone and pretend we understand them. You wake up in a world where faith is no longer a choice, it's infrastructure. Religion becomes the scaffolding that holds civilization together. And at the heart of it all, the same celestial faces that once descended from the clouds. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki. The Babylonians recycled the same deities under new names: Marduk, Ishtar, Enlil, Enki. Each one came with a job title: God of Storms, God of Justice, God of, please don't flood my city again. You prayed not out of love, but negotiation. Worship was a survival strategy. Then there were the Egyptians who went one step further. Their gods didn't just rule from the sky, they wore animal heads, built massive stone monuments, and seemed to take interior design tips from the Milky Way. The pharaoh wasn't just a ruler, he was an antenna. A human conduit for the divine frequencies still humming faintly from the heavens. You start to notice how eerily familiar it all feels. Temples aligned with stars. Myths describing beings descending in flaming boats. Deities depicted in helmets that suspiciously resemble space gear. Though of course, they'll tell you it's symbolic. Everything is symbolic, until you see the same symbols repeated on opposite sides of the planet. In the Hebrew stories, the Watchers become angels, divine bureaucrats, half caretaker, half traitor. They're not supposed to mingle with humans, but they do. They teach forbidden arts, then fall from grace. And somewhere in the retelling, the narrative softens. The Watchers become a warning about pride, temptation, and curiosity. You can almost hear the cosmic sarcasm. Sure, we could have left them ignorant, but what's the fun in that? Meanwhile, in Greece, the gods live on a mountain, conveniently distant but close enough to meddle. In India, divine beings descend in vimanas, celestial chariots that sound alarmingly like aircraft. In Mesoamerica, the feathered serpents bring knowledge from the stars and are later crucified or banished, depending on the version. Different pantheons, same script. The sky opens, beings descend, civilization happens, chaos follows. Religion, at its core, becomes a translation problem. Each culture tries to interpret impossible encounters with metaphors, rituals, and stories. And because humans are terrible at letting go of power, the myths evolve into hierarchies, gods above, humans below, and a handful of chosen ones somewhere in between pretending they can keep the balance. But here's the twist no one likes to mention. For all their rituals and prayers, ancient people weren't blindly faithful. They bargained. They argued. They cursed their gods when things went wrong. They tried to reverse engineer the heavens through ceremony. Religion wasn't just belief, it was technology. And like all technology, it came with instructions written in languages no one fully understood. You can almost feel the irony. Humans build entire civilizations around the memory of beings who might have seen them as lab experiments. And yet, that longing for connection, that quiet hope that the teachers might return, fuels everything from pyramids to poetry. Even now, in the hum of modern life, the pattern persists. Churches, mosques, temples, all chasing echoes of the same sky. Perhaps religion was never about blind devotion. Perhaps it was humanity's first attempt to keep in touch. To say, we remember you. We're still here. We're still building, still praying, still pretending we understand what you wanted from us. And maybe, just maybe, the silence that answers isn't emptiness. Maybe it's observation. The test. Waiting to see what you'll do next. By now, you've noticed a pattern, one that stretches farther than any one civilization, farther than the flood, farther even than the memory of the Watchers themselves. Stories of sky beings are everywhere. It doesn't matter where you go, the Andes, the Nile, the Indus, the Yellow River, someone, somewhere, remembers a visitor who came from above. In South America, the legends tell of Viracocha, a god who emerged from the sea or the sky, teaching people how to farm, how to build, how to count. He wanders, disappears, promises to return. Sound familiar? It should. Across the globe, the pattern is the same. Descent, instruction, departure, and the implicit warning, don't forget us. China has its own echoes. The Shangdi and celestial administrators are said to rule from above, deciding the fate of kings and dynasties. The Yellow Emperor, Huangdi, is sometimes described as semi-divine, taught by beings who might as well have been sky visitors. The stories align with constellations. They teach morality, technology, governance, all under the watchful eye of the heavens. And in the Arctic, the Inuit speak of star people, luminous, mysterious, and patient, who give guidance, then retreat to their constellations. Even the tribes of Africa and Australia have stories of the sky fathers or star ancestors, bringing fire, tools, and law. Different names. Different rituals. Same narrative skeleton. You can almost trace the trajectory of the sky beings, starting in Mesopotamia, spreading knowledge, then appearing independently across continents, either remembered directly or reinvented in local myth. It's as if humanity is wired to recognize the pattern, or as if someone really did travel the world, leaving fragments behind in stone, word, and memory. It's tempting to dismiss this as coincidence or cultural contamination, but the details persist: the shining descent, the teaching of essential skills, the promise of return. Even after centuries, those elements remain intact, as though the core story refuses to die. You notice another curious thing. The stories often involve duality. The beings are benevolent teachers but also dangerous. They teach, but they punish. They intermarry, but their children are often giants or warriors who bring chaos. They descend, but they leave instructions to prevent humans from exceeding them. It's a paradox that every culture seems to understand intuitively. Too much knowledge is a risk. Too little is catastrophic. And somehow, humanity adapts. We create priesthoods, temples, kings, and laws, frameworks to contain the energy of these myths. We encode knowledge in ritual so it survives even if the original visitors vanish. We tell stories about floods, fires, and divine retribution to enforce compliance. And yet, at the same time, we pass down innovation, exploration, and curiosity. This is the legacy of the sky beings, if you believe the whispers of the myths. That knowledge and authority are inseparable, that stories can outlast civilizations, and that humanity's hunger for understanding will never go away. They left fragments that guide, caution, and inspire, all at once. And if you sit quietly under the night sky, tracing Orion, Sirius, or the Pleiades, you might feel the same tug your ancestors felt. A quiet pull towards something that may or may not be watching. A pattern that stretches across continents, across millennia, across stories. And a question you never really answer. Did they teach us, or are we remembering what they always intended for us to remember? It's an uncomfortable thought, but oddly comforting. Somewhere, someone, something left a mark. And that mark has survived every flood, every empire, every century of forgetting. The sky remembers. The earth remembers. And you, of course, remember too. You wake in a world that's learned too much and obeyed too little. The sky beings, the Watchers, whatever they were, once had a rule. Observe, teach, do not touch. And, naturally, that went exactly as well as every other rule in human history. Because curiosity and attraction are forces that even gods can't resist. The myths say it happened quietly. The Watchers descended to instruct humanity, astronomy, medicine, metallurgy, and along the way, they noticed something unexpected. Not humanity in general. You specifically, fragile, short-lived, reckless. But fascinating. In the Book of Enoch, it's written that they saw the daughters of men, that they were fair. And with that one sentence, heaven's experiment turned into a scandal. The divine fell for the mortal. And from that forbidden union came the Nephilim, half god, half human, entirely problematic. The stories describe them as giants. Great warriors. Beings of immense power and appetite. The kind of offspring who eat a village before breakfast and invent warfare before lunch. A cosmic HR disaster, if there ever was one. Other cultures tell similar tales. In Mesopotamia, you hear whispers of demigods, kings who claim ancestry from the stars, blessed and cursed by the same blood. In Greece, it's the children of Zeus, heroes who defy mortality but can't escape tragedy. In India, the offspring of the gods are caught between duty and rebellion. And everywhere, the same underlying warning hums. When heaven and earth mix, the world trembles. You can almost imagine the scene, the Watchers looking down at the chaos they caused. Cities built too high. Creatures too powerful. Humans learning too quickly. The line between mortal and divine blurring like smoke. And someone somewhere in the sky decides, enough. The flood myths begin soon after. Not out of random cruelty, but as a kind of cosmic reset button. Too many hybrids. Too much knowledge. Too little control. So, the sky opens again, and the experiment ends. Or so the stories say. Of course, humans are stubborn creatures. You don't forget easily. You remember the giants. You carve their shapes into stone, tell stories about their might, their downfall, their strange beauty. You build monuments to their memory, pyramids, ziggurats, standing stones. And in every culture, you whisper the same question. What happened to them? Some say the hybrids died in the flood. Others claim they went underground, literally or metaphorically. Hidden civilizations beneath mountains or oceans, waiting for the time when the sky will open again. Maybe they became gods in their own right. Maybe they became myths so deep in your bloodline you can't tell where the legend ends and the DNA begins. The strangest thing is how these stories refuse to die. Every religion, every folklore archive, every whisper in the dark corners of human memory repeats the same taboo. The union of heaven and earth. The forbidden mix. The consequence that always follows. And maybe that's the point. Maybe the real danger wasn't the unions themselves, but what they symbolized. Connection. Curiosity. Rebellion against cosmic order. Because if a god can fall in love with a human, then the distance between heaven and earth is smaller than anyone wants to admit. So you live with the echo of it. The bloodlines, the myths, the heroes, the monsters. You tell their stories by firelight and pretend they're fiction, though somewhere inside you know better. It's not just myth. It's memory, diluted, retold, blurred by time, but real enough to make you wonder who's really watching whom. And in the stillness of night, when the stars pulse faintly and the air feels heavier than usual, you think about those first forbidden moments. When the sky leaned close and the earth didn't pull away. The rain starts quietly at first. A drizzle, barely noticed. Then the rivers swell. The skies darken. And suddenly, everything you built, everything you trusted, is at the mercy of forces you can no longer negotiate with. The myths call it a flood, a cleansing, a punishment. They say the gods looked at humanity and decided, too much knowledge, too much hybrid blood, too much curiosity. And so they pressed the reset button. You scramble for higher ground, ankle deep in water, your tools and food floating around you like debris from a half-forgotten dream. You think of the Watchers, the Anunnaki, the sky beings who once guided you, taught you, maybe even loved you. And you realize they've left you to your own devices now. Or perhaps they never truly left. They're just waiting, watching from above, amused and irritated in equal measure. Across the world, stories echo the same event. In Mesopotamia, it's Ziusidra, Atrahasis, Utnapishtim. In the Bible, Noah builds an ark, gathers the animals, survives the wrath of a sky that can flood the planet. In India, Manu saves seeds of life. In Mesoamerica, floods, rainstorms, and divine wrath reshape the land. Different cultures, different names, same theme. Humanity reaches a limit, and the sky enforces a reset. You watch as people try to survive, carrying seeds, livestock, and hope in boats, baskets, or bare hands. The flood spares some, drowns others. It's impartial, inevitable, and final. The survivors will become the founders of the next civilization, the storytellers who pass down what they remember, or what they think they remember, about the sky, the knowledge, and the consequences of reaching too far. It's not just a story about water. It's a story about limits, control, and the uneasy relationship between teacher and pupil. The Watchers gave you knowledge. They gave you tools, instructions, the seed of civilization itself. But too much autonomy, too much curiosity, and suddenly the lesson turns dangerous. And the flood is the punctuation mark. You wade through the aftermath. The earth smells of mud, salt, and death. Temples are submerged. Cities are gone. And yet, in the midst of ruin, humans begin again. They plant crops. They rebuild walls. They remember the stories, the instructions, the warnings, the deeds of those who came down from the sky. And that's the thing about floods. They erase physical structures but rarely erase memory. The survivors whisper tales of the giants, the divine teachers, the hybrids, the punishment. These stories become myth, legend, and religion. They teach caution, yes, but also ambition. Even after a flood, humanity keeps trying to reach the sky. There's irony in this, of course. The beings who punished humanity for overstepping boundaries created a species that never stops overstepping boundaries. It's as if the flood wasn't a punishment, but a test. And you, the descendant of survivors, continue to fail spectacularly and beautifully generation after generation. You glance at the stars, Orion, the Pleiades, Sirius. They look the same as they did before the deluge, constant and indifferent. Somewhere in that sky, the first watchers may still observe, calculating, smiling faintly at your stubbornness. Or maybe it's just light traveling across the void, indifferent to all the floods, knowledge, and hubris below. Either way, the message is clear. Civilization is fragile. Knowledge is dangerous. And curiosity, well, curiosity survives even when the world is underwater. And so humanity rises again. Temples, cities, kings, and myths are rebuilt. The lessons of the flood remain encoded in stories, rituals, and architecture. The watchers may have gone, but their shadow lingers. And that shadow shapes every step you take, every star you chart, every story you dare to tell. The waters recede, leaving behind mud, debris, and a faintly suspicious silence. You step onto the new earth and realize something crucial. Survival is only the beginning. Civilization is waiting. Not the one you had before, but one shaped by memory, fear, and ambition. The survivors gather in clusters, instinct driving them to organize. Some become farmers, planting the seeds they saved. Some become builders, stacking mud bricks with a precision that suggests divine instruction. And some, the clever, the cunning, the ambitious, see opportunity. They become leaders, priests, rulers of small empires, holding authority granted by both memory and myth. The sky beings, whether present or imagined, are central to this new order. The Anunnaki are no longer just teachers. They are ancestors, patrons, guarantors of legitimacy. Claim descent from them, and you inherit divine authority. Ignore them, and you risk chaos, political, social, maybe even cosmic. Temples rise first, often atop the foundations of drowned cities. Ziggurats, pyramids, and mounds serve as reminders. The gods saw everything. They watched, they judged, they intervened, and they might return. The architecture encodes more than piety, it encodes memory. It encodes law, astronomy, mathematics, and the implicit warning. Knowledge is power, and power attracts attention. Kings and priests intertwine myth and governance seamlessly. The king is not merely ruler but intermediary, descended from the divine, in communication with forces unseen. The priest interprets signs, deciphers omens, and ensures the populace remembers the consequences of curiosity. In practical terms, everyone behaves better when they believe the sky is still watching. You notice patterns repeating across continents. In Egypt, pharaohs rule as living gods, claiming lineage from Ra or Osiris. In Mesopotamia, kings take the Anunnaki as ancestors, relying on scribes to document every decree and every miracle. In Mesoamerica, rulers align calendars with celestial bodies, performing rituals that honor gods who may or may not have ever touched the earth. The template is universal. Sky beings become myth, myth becomes authority, authority becomes empire. And yet, there's always tension. The stories contain reminders of past failures, floods, punishments, and hybrid offspring that led to chaos. Civilizations rebuild, but the memory of the Watchers lingers in every law, every ritual, every warning. You don't just obey rulers, you obey the echo of beings who might descend again. You don't just farm the land, you follow instructions left by teachers who disappeared into legend. Even daily life carries the residue of myth. Irrigation channels, crop rotations, and star charts are all traces of the original lessons. Mathematics and writing, tools given by the sky beings, become instruments of empire. Taxes, inventories, and grain storage are not just practical. They are spiritual, a way to honor the invisible hierarchy that once demanded obedience. Society is a living testament to the influence of those who may have been here before. And then, as always, ambition grows. Humans remember the flood and the punishments, but they also remember the gifts. Temples become universities. Kings become patrons of science and art. Priests become scholars, blending ritual with observation. Every civilization, no matter how far from Mesopotamia, repeats the same story. Build, teach, warn, rebuild, aspire. You look at the skyline, mud bricks stacked, pyramids rising, ziggurats piercing clouds. You notice the human obsession with reaching upward, toward the sky, toward knowledge. It's almost poetic in a darkly funny way. The same lesson repeats: reach too high, and you risk everything. Reach just enough, and you inherit the world. The Watchers may be gone, or maybe they're still observing. Either way, their legacy is undeniable: civilization itself. Empires, kings, gods, and myths all trace back to the moment when beings from the sky decided to teach humanity how to rise, and warn them not to soar too close to the sun. And here you are, centuries later, still standing on the foundations of flood, myth, and sky-given knowledge, wondering how much of what you built is truly yours, and how much is inherited memory from a lesson taught before your time. You step into a world rebuilt from mud, memory, and fear, and you notice something striking. Humans aren't just surviving anymore. They're inventing. They're taking the lessons left behind by the sky beings and turning them into tools, systems, and technologies that no one would dare call divine, though the fingerprints are unmistakable. The Anunnaki, the Watchers, the sky beings, whatever you want to call them, didn't just teach. They handed humans a starter kit. Agriculture, writing, metallurgy, astronomy, mathematics. Everything you needed to take the raw chaos of the world and make it obey you, mostly. Of course, there was always a catch. You had to interpret the lessons correctly. And humans? Well, humans are notoriously literal and often spectacularly creative. Take agriculture, for example. You didn't just plant seeds, you learned when to plant them by reading the stars. Irrigation channels carved through the earth weren't merely practical, they were celestial maps in disguise. Crop rotation, fertilization, plowing techniques, all of it seemed natural, until you realize it's exactly the kind of knowledge that could have come from a being who had seen the entire planet from above. Metallurgy, too, shows the hand of instruction. Copper, tin, and bronze are more than materials, they are transformation in miniature. Humans learned to melt stone into tools sharp enough to cut wood, shape metal into weapons, or fashion implements for farming. The techniques were precise, almost elegant. It's as if the instructions came from someone who could see the future, or had already lived it. Then there's writing. Cuneiform, hieroglyphs, pictograms, all attempts to freeze knowledge into a form humans could pass along. And what knowledge? Astronomy, trade, law, ritual, mathematics, the things that sustain civilization. You notice how the earliest writing is less about storytelling and more about accounting. Not because humans loved bureaucracy, but because the instructions left by the sky beings demanded precision. A missing grain, a miscounted field, a misaligned star could have consequences. Astronomy, perhaps more than anything, signals the invisible hand behind human innovation. The stars become calendars, omens, and maps. Constellations encode agricultural cycles, floods, and celestial events. Humans look at the heavens and see patterns, predict seasons, and chart time, almost as if someone had planted that knowledge there for them to find. And maybe they did. Even art carries echoes of the sky beings. Winged figures, helmets, tools, strange animals. The motifs recur in temples and carvings. What looks like decoration is really memory, the subtle imprint of beings who once walked among humans, or at least appeared to. It's practical, symbolic, and just slightly unsettling. You notice a darker pattern too. Knowledge is power, and power attracts hierarchy. The skills given by the sky beings, writing, metallurgy, astronomy, do more than sustain life. They allow a few to control the many. Scribes, priests, kings, all wield tools first gifted by those who once descended from the stars. Civilization grows, but it's always shaped by what was taught and by what was forbidden. And of course, the lessons aren't complete. Some knowledge is fragmentary, cryptic, dangerous. Humans learn to copy the tools, but they often misapply them. Fire becomes war. Writing becomes propaganda. Astronomy becomes astrology. Even the gifts from the sky carry risk, a reminder that the Watcher's legacy is double-edged. Still, you can't help admiring it. Look at the cities, the fields, the pyramids, the canals. All built from fragments of knowledge handed down in whispers, carvings, and myths. Tools that were once divine now feel human, but you know the truth. The sky beings left a template, and humanity has spent millennia filling in the details. And every time you use a plow, a wheel, a written calculation, or a star chart, you're touching the shadow of that ancient instruction manual. A ghostly blueprint from teachers, watchers, or gods who may or may not still be watching. And you feel it, that same pull to reach higher, dig deeper, learn more. Because knowledge, once given, never truly belongs to anyone. You look up at the night sky and notice it's always the same, yet always different. Constellations trace the movements of gods, heroes, and catastrophes, as if the heavens themselves are a storyboard for the stories humans tell about themselves. Every culture, everywhere, takes the lessons of the sky beings and wraps them in narrative. The Anunnaki become gods, rulers, and judges. The Watchers are angels, demigods, or forbidden teachers. Heroes appear, semi-divine figures bridging the gap between mortals and the sky. These myths aren't just entertainment, they're survival manuals, moral guides, and subtle warnings disguised as stories. In Mesopotamia, Gilgamesh walks the earth, 2/3 god and 1/3 human, wrestling with mortality. His exploits mirror the hybrid offspring of the Watchers, powerful, flawed, and incapable of living entirely among humans. His flood story echoes the lessons of a sky that intervenes when curiosity and ambition exceed the bounds of safety. You start to see the pattern. Myth is memory in disguise. Egyptian myths take a different form but the same logic. Ra travels the sky in his sun bark. Osiris dies and rises, teaching life, death, and rebirth. Pharaohs claim the blood of gods in their veins, inheriting knowledge and authority in equal measure. Even the Nile's predictable flooding feels like a coded message from the sky beings, structure, rhythm, and obedience all bundled in a natural event. In Greece, heroes like Heracles, Perseus, and Achilles perform feats only possible through divine heritage. They fight monsters, tame chaos, and often die tragically, illustrating the cost of meddling with powers beyond human reach. Every myth carries the residue of the same ancient lesson. The sky gave, but it also demanded restraint. In India, the Puranas and epics describe devas, asuras, and avatars descending from the heavens. They teach morality, warfare, governance, and arts, the full curriculum of civilization. Mortals interact, rebel, or fall in love with them, often with catastrophic consequences. The stories encode cosmic rules. Knowledge is a gift, authority is dangerous, ambition is a risk. Even in the Americas, Quetzalcoatl and other sky beings shape mythic history. They introduce writing, calendars, and agriculture, then vanish, promising a return. Every culture seems obsessed with the tension between divine presence and absence. A push-pull that defines belief, governance, and human behavior for centuries. You begin to notice something curious. The myths all preserve the same duality. Sky beings are both mentors and tyrants. Heroes are both saviors and cautionary tales. Knowledge is both illumination and hazard. It's as if humanity instinctively understood the lessons of the Watchers and encoded them into stories that would survive even floods, empires, and the erosion of memory. These myths are also functional. They teach astronomy through allegory, mathematics through epic struggle, morality through divine punishment. They ensure humans continue to build, explore, and calculate, but always under the shadow of beings who once intervened directly. It's elegant and terrifying, like a cosmic training program with no graduation ceremony. And of course, the myths evolve. Heroes die, gods vanish, empires rise and fall. But the core story remains. Beings came from the sky, shaped humanity, gave knowledge, imposed limits. Floods, punishments, forbidden unions, and divine gifts repeat endlessly in mythic form, reminding you of what once was and what could still be. You lie awake at night, tracing constellations, imagining their descent, their teachings, their watchful eyes. Every myth is a memory, every hero a reflection of forbidden lessons, every god a shadow of a visitor from above. And you realize, even if the Watchers never existed, the patterns they left in human culture, in tools, stories, laws, and ambition, are as real as the stars themselves. It's comforting. It's terrifying. And it explains why humanity can't stop looking up, wondering, building, and mythologizing. You walk through the ruins of an ancient city, stones worn smooth by wind, water, and centuries of human traffic. You touch the carved reliefs of winged figures, etched tools, and celestial symbols. And suddenly it all clicks. The floods, the giants, the teachers from above. It isn't just myth. It's inheritance. The Watchers, the Anunnaki, the sky beings, whatever you choose to call them, may have vanished. But their influence never did. It lingers in the DNA of civilization, in the structure of society, in the way humans look at the stars and make plans. Kings, priests, scribes, and architects all inherited fragments of their lessons, sometimes consciously, often unconsciously. Look at law codes, like Hammurabi's. Justice, hierarchy, consequence. The idea that rules are absolute, sanctioned from above. That's not a human invention alone. It's a blueprint, refined, passed down, tested, retold. The sky beings taught order, and humans codified it, brick by brick. Look at mathematics and astronomy. We map the heavens, predict seasons, calculate cycles, all thanks to fragments of instruction from beings whose gaze humans once felt literally overhead. And the irony? We often treat their legacy as coincidence, inspiration, or divine mystery, while missing the fact that civilization itself is a continuous echo of their lessons. Even human imagination carries their shadow. Stories of gods, giants, demigods, and heroes repeat endlessly. Art, ritual, architecture, all encode knowledge once taught in whispers or direct demonstration. Every culture interprets it differently, but the skeleton remains. Descent, instruction, warning, departure, legacy. You start to see the legacy in leadership too. Kings claim divine blood, priests mediate the unseen, empires build on foundations laid by myth and memory. Social hierarchies, power structures, and cultural norms, all influenced by the suggestion that someone above shaped the world and could intervene at any moment. Even when humans forget the original visitors, the pattern persists. And knowledge, of course, is the deadliest inheritance. The Watchers gave tools, agriculture, writing, metallurgy, and warned about their misuse. Humans misused them constantly. Fire became war. Writing became bureaucracy. Astronomy became astrology. Still, civilization advanced. And with each advance, the lessons of the sky became both more encoded and more obscured. You notice the subtlety. The Watchers didn't just teach survival. They taught curiosity, ambition, and innovation, but also restraint, obedience, and the cost of overreach. Civilizations that remembered and interpreted the lessons carefully thrived. Those that ignored the warnings collapsed, leaving only fragments for later generations to reconstruct. And perhaps the greatest legacy is human curiosity itself. Even now, we look at the sky, hypothesize, explore, and build. Telescopes, satellites, rockets. We follow the pattern set millennia ago, reaching for the heavens, attempting to bridge the gap once spanned by teachers who may or may not have been gods. It's an inheritance you carry whether you believe or not. It shapes how you build, how you govern, how you imagine, how you aspire. You are the sum of floods survived, knowledge preserved, myths repeated, and warnings heeded or ignored. The sky may be empty now. The Watchers may be gone. But their shadow stretches across history, across continents, across the centuries, and it shapes you every time you reach for more than the earth can offer. And in the quiet of night, under stars that have watched all of this unfold, you realize something important. Their legacy isn't just in the past. It's inside you, and it always will be. You sit beneath the night sky. Its stars more distant than your mind can grasp, yet closer than your imagination dares to admit. Millennia have passed since the Watchers, the Anunnaki, the sky beings first touched the earth, and still humans look up, waiting, wondering, hoping. The myths never ended, they just evolved. Floods became legends. Giants became heroes. The sky beings became gods, angels, or ghosts of morality. And every new generation inherited the same pattern. Look up, seek guidance, measure the stars, and question what is possible. You can almost hear them. The faint echo of footsteps on distant mountains. The rustle of wings. A whisper of instructions long forgotten but never lost. The lessons remain encoded in stone, in stories, in your own restless curiosity. Civilizations rise and fall, empires crumble, languages die. Yet the urge persists, to build, to chart, to discover, to defy limits. The Watcher's influence is subtle, patient, persistent. Even when forgotten, it emerges again, disguised as ambition, science, exploration, or art. Humans keep looking upward because we always have. Because something told us we are meant to. And perhaps, somewhere, the sky is not silent. Perhaps the beings who once descended still watch from their stars, waiting to see whether humanity will remember the lessons, or repeat the mistakes. Or maybe they never left at all. Maybe we are still under observation. Still students in a classroom that stretches across time, learning, stumbling, building, and reaching. You notice the irony. Humanity was warned, and yet curiosity persists. Knowledge was given, and yet we still strive for more. Obedience was demanded, and yet rebellion is inevitable. We carry the duality of our teachers in our bones, in our cities, in the myths we tell our children. The night is calm. The wind whispers through reeds, trees, and ruins. You breathe deeply, sensing the continuity of everything. Floods, giants, gods, tools, and stories. Civilization itself feels like a memory of something older, something cosmic, something that came from the sky and left a trace in your blood, your mind, your ambition. And so you wait. Not with fear, exactly, nor with hope. But with a kind of quiet acknowledgement that someone, something, once descended, and may descend again. That the sky holds secrets humanity has only begun to comprehend. That the lessons, warnings, and gifts of the Watchers are never truly gone. You stare upward, tracing constellations that have guided generations. You imagine wings, craft, or light descending, bringing instruction once more. You feel a pull, the same pull your ancestors felt, the subtle tug of possibility, danger, knowledge, and wonder. And you realize, waiting is part of the lesson. Humanity survives because it remembers, learns, builds, and reaches. And whether the sky opens tomorrow, a century from now, or never again, the memory of those who once came down remains. The night is quiet. The stars are eternal. And you, like every human before you, look up and wonder. Because the sky taught us how to live. And in its silence, it reminds us why we keep trying.